Good morning. It is Friday, the 26th of July. I'm afraid we're starting a few minutes late, but welcome to Coffee, Buses and Politics. I'm Ringo Starr. I'm joined by John Lennon, by George Harrison, and by the fifth Beatle, because to be honest, I'm not a huge fan of Paul McCartney. There you go. I said it. So today on Coffee, Buses and Politics, we're going to start by talking about 20 mile an hour and my big excursion up the road to Alconbury, which was lots and lots of fun. And I think we're going to talk a bit about the Conservative runners and riders for the mayoral election. Ooh, exciting. I think that's what we're going to be covering. As ever, if people have got any questions or comments or whatever it is, do put them wherever you are, and we should be able to see them. Certainly Facebook and YouTube and so on appears. If we're not answering, it's either because, well, it's probably because we can't see it on the comments thing that appears here. So, without further ado, 20 miles an hour. There's a scheme from the county council to put in 20 mile an hour schemes across the county. Broadly in favour, personally, I'm broadly in favour of 20 mile an hour where people want them, basically, and not where people don't. And there was a consultation process, and the consultation, I think, wasn't done as well as it could have been, shall we say. I think they found some responses that hadn't been taken into account to begin with, which is unfortunate. And there was a delegated decision which wasn't done in the right process and ended up going to the Highways Committee and so on.
That's specifically for Huntingdon, isn't it? It's not for the whole county. It's
no. This is sorry. I should have said, yeah. This is for Huntingdon, for just for Huntingdon. And the scheme that's gone through is 20. So basically, the through roads, so like Sapley Road or Main Street or the Ring Road, stay at 30, but the other roads are 20. And the top end of St. Peter's, the industrial bit, is 20 mile an hour. So it's I went and spoke at the county council, because the county council originally asked the town council to do a sort of consultation, and we did, and we came back with 3 areas that we thought made sense to start with. And I think there's a bit of bad feeling in that the town council did quite a decent amount of work to choose those 3 areas, run our own consultation. Okay, this is where we think makes sense. And what the county council came back with was a much bigger scheme covering the residential roads across all of Huntingdon, without really any reference to, we were never told why. So I think there's a bit of upset there, but I think there's a couple of questions that have come out of this. One is about 20 mile an hour schemes and what people think of them. The other one, and this is something I find particularly interesting, is on consultations, because there's a lot of consultations. In fact, consultations seem to happen to just about everything, and no one answers them. I think we've got 40 something responses for a town of 25,000 on 20 miles an hour, which suggests that something's gone wrong with the consultation process.
I find this really interesting on consultation. So if you look at just the numbers and the report, if you read the report for committee, and I was there in the public gallery listening to David, because I'm not one of the councillors on Highways Committee.
And thank you for the support. I was actually quite nervous.
How was it, David? You said you confessed to being nervous before. Was it a nerve-wracking experience, or did they make you feel welcome?
So just on that, they were really nice. Actually, everybody was very friendly. So like the on the way in, I met Emma, who was the person on the desk, who was just really friendly and really nice, and like, oh, how are you? What are you? Just nice. I was there with Alex and Luke, so it was good to have, you know, sort of support. It's just, it's, you know, county council and 20 mile an hour and so on. I don't know why. I mean, I've spoken of lots of things over the years. I think it's the 20 mile an hour is a bit out of my comfort zone in not you know, not being across the details I have been on other things, but also it feels sort of grown up politics.
So I mean, go on. Sorry.
No, I'm done.
All right, because I was going to go back to the consultation because at 40 something people responded, and that's the difficulty I have. Like often when, you know, when hearing this argument, like when someone on the committee and it can be people either side say, well, but the majority of people clearly don't want this scheme, and you look up and say, okay, so you have 42 people responding to the consultation, 26 in objection. So yes, it's over 50% objecting, sure, 15 in support, and 1 person providing a neutral response. But the first question I have always is how representative this is and how the consultation was actually conducted. And it comes up in every single decision. Like at least 1 person will be like, but over 50% of people clearly don't want this. This is clearly not a majority view. And I'm just sat there thinking, like, I have no idea if it is or not because it's not representative. So how can we argue that? But then it looks also very bad because obviously we had this issue locally as well. And I had a local highways improvement program with double yellows just to prevent parking on a corner of a road. And again, you have the objections that completely outweigh the positive responses. But then on that particular case, I knew because I door knocked every single door on that road that most people are either neutral or they didn't really care about it, or they were like actually in favor. But then the objections come out as majority. So it is very challenging.
Yeah, I mean, I deal with this all the time with the stuff I do around planning, and you know, one of the things that I think you have to bear in mind with it, what's the purpose of the consultation, but the second thing is that the people that tend to respond tend to be the people that are more animated about it, and by and large, that's people that don't want something mostly. But the purpose of the consultation is not a referendum, and I think that's an important thing to understand. What consultation is there to do is, yes, to a certain extent, give you the strength of feeling, which a low turnout gives you a sense of. But it's also to bring forward arguments that you as a councillor need to weigh up in making a decision on whether you support something or not. But it's not weighing it up in sense of more than 50% support. It's about saying, okay, these are the arguments they're bringing forward. How do they balance against the bigger picture that we're seeing and being presented by officers?
I mean, I think sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it's just that, just understanding that sort of concept about what consultation is for, because it's the thing I get when I do consultations around planning more than anything is, you know, almost everybody doesn't want it because almost everybody that's commented is negative. When actually the role of the councillor is not to say, well, 100 people objected to it, so therefore nobody wants it. The role of a councillor is to say, what are they saying? How does that weigh up against the evidence that we're being given?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're very polarizing, aren't they? They tend to, if they don't attract all negative people, they tend to attract people from both sides of the spectrum, which I think was the case during the STZ consultation, which was relatively successful and had high numbers of participants, but it still didn't represent the complete spectrum of views because it tended to focus to people who either strongly for the scheme or strongly against it. So that's the other problem, isn't it? And like Martin says, you have to use your own common sense to weigh up those arguments and speak to people who are not represented inside the consultation.
I mean, I think there's. I think. So I'm just thinking about the 20 mile hour thing. I mean, I think that. Okay, I'm going to start that sentence again. There is an issue that I think people see consultations. I think people don't know what consultations are for. And it didn't help. There was one particular councillor. I can't remember the gentleman's name, who was saying, "Oh, this isn't doing this isn't democracy because this is what the consultation said," and that I thought that was actually pretty poor, because they should know that's not what consultations are for, and it's not. But I think there is a misunderstanding or misconception amongst the public that the consultation will decide what happens, and I wonder if there's a need to challenge that among people and say, or better understanding what consultations are for, and maybe sort of include that on every document, every consultation. The purpose of this consultation is, and make it clear that it's not a sort of democratic exercise or a numbers exercise in that way. I think there is also an issue when you say, okay, I take the point you make, Martin, about the idea being to gauge arguments and what the concerns are. Huntingdon's a town of 25,000 and we got 40 something responses. I mean, I'm not sure that's worth, and I'm not sure that it's worth engaging with, or how useful is that?
Well, that depends on two things. The numbers is important, and it's not to ignore the numbers, but surely it's about the quality of what comes forward from that consultation as well, and that's quite important. I have to say, one of the things for me is if you step back from Huntingdon about 20-mile-an-hour limits, East Cambridgeshire are pretty adamant that the consultation around 20-mile-an-hour limits that was carried out for Ely was also not good enough. And so, I think you have to set it into that context as well.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I'm wondering is the question is that I'm really getting at, and we should probably talk about the merits of 20 mile an hour, is how do we get people, these consultations are important, they are worth doing, I think, but how do we get more people to take part in them? I mean, the other thing is on the 20 mile an hour scheme, on this particular one, I'm not sure what the point of the consultation was.
Agree with that.
Because it's, I mean, and this goes something back a lot from Stephen, the gunning principles, that you should consult at the sort of development stage of proposals. I mean, I don't think this was at the development stage. I think there was a complete proposal that was consulted on. And, I'm not sure, apart from the technical problems, I'm not sure what the point was of consulting, because I do think on this.
Didn't you just say that they completely changed the scheme from what was proposed in the consultation? So that suggests that it's the area of the scheme rather than.
The original 3 areas was proposed by the town council based on the town council's consultation. So the county council came said to the town council, look, what do you reckon? And we went and did some work, and we said, well, we reckon these 3 areas, and we'll see how it goes. What they came back with, and there are technical reasons for that are good reasons. That about how 20 mile an hour zones work and where they're most effective. They never communicated those. Those didn't come out until the actual meeting, and it would that was frustrating. I think there was some the town council could have been a bit more on the ball about responding as well, but yeah.
I think that's the frustrating bit I feel. So I have comments about how we get more people engaged in general, and when you should get more people engaged. But I think the frustrating thing is when you have at least the feeling or the perception that you can influence a certain scheme, and in fact you weren't in the first place. So for example, it's the same discussion as in this STZ, a few of us were like, why don't we start with doing Cambridge Central first and then consult on how it went and then potentially expand. And then very quickly you're like, well, this was already an option that was considered and discounted because of those reasons. And you're like, oh, wait a second, and what's the point? What's the point to think about any alternative if this was discounted in the first place? And I can understand sometimes they're very good reasons, but if those reasons don't come up at an early stage and you invite, let's say in this case, the town council saying, please tell us your views, or in the other case of inviting councillors or other people to come up with alternatives to the said scheme, and he said, well, but we're going to consider those in the first place because it doesn't work for technical reasons, because we don't have the money for it, or because whatever it is, then it's like, well, why that waste my time then? Just tell me what you want to do and I will say what I think about it. So I do have that kind of issue, and this goes beyond 20 mile an hour schemes. kind of my experience in general.
But didn't the STZ start off with a citizens assembly though? That's one of the things they pioneered, and when we're talking about these things, that's kind of the gold standard, isn't it, of public consultation, in which you get a large enough demographically engineered selection of people that they represent the entire community who you're representing, which I think that's a difficult thing to do. Because you can't press gang people into doing it, but if you can do it, it's a successful way of trying to get through this problem of polarization and making sure that more people's views are represented. I think so. But the trouble with those is they're expensive and they're a bit clunky and not done very often. So I'd love to do a citizens assembly on something, but I don't think 20-mile-an-hour zones is going to be the thing because it's
no. I mean, no, it isn't. I mean, I think 20-mile-an-hour work for 20-mile-an-hour zones. Citizens assemblies, I think, work for unlocking really difficult things. So I think something like how do you deal with funding pensions in the future, or something like that, might be a way of doing it. And I think they can bring a sort of amount of legitimacy for different things. There's, particularly, where a difficult decision has to be made, and say, okay, because of the lack of trust in politics and so on. They are kind of expensive, and you can't do them for everything. And I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, the other thing that we've done sometimes, and if it's helped, is but to actually do workshops rather than as part of a consultation. And we've done this with development sometimes, and what it helps with development, and it depends. It's really, really good for doing stuff that is so I'm getting technical, but that is going through reserve matters. Mm-hmm. So you've got a principle of development established, and you could say with a local plan allocation, you could do the same thing, and then to bring forward, a lot of key players and a lot of key individuals, and get them sat around tables doing design work and stuff like that, or discussing ideas. And so there is a sense I could see how that would work for something like a 20-mile-an-hour limit. Because it'd give you a chance to air the views with those people and get a really informed response back about, what areas might work and what areas might not. However, to come out of something with that and then have it delivered in a completely different way would be something else.
The other thing is, there were responses to the consultation. So in the papers of the thing, there are responses to people's points in the consultation. And I think the points that were made about, responding to people were entirely valid. They completely make sense. But no, I don't think anybody saw them, because I think the only place they appeared was in the consultation, in the papers that went, I don't know if they emailed out to people who did the consultation, Yeah. And I felt,
I have to say, if I was a town councillor in your shoes, David, I would feel. I think I would feel a little bit put out to have done the consultation yourselves as a town council, to come up with recommendations, and then with no apparent foundation to come up with something completely different. I think I would be frustrated with that. I must admit, I'm not sure there's much good practice in that.
No, I'm afraid, I frankly, I do, and the town council does feel, we sort of take umbrage at it, because we're trying to do things properly and try, and whatever. And a town council, we do have sort of limited resources to actually go and do that. What for us was a relatively large consultation that actually got more submissions than the county council one. For us, is actually quite a commitment of resource.
Yep.
I mean, it's a very interesting point to say. You actually got more responses than the county council consultation. That kind of links to the questions around like how much we should decentralize those processes. Are people more likely to respond to, let's say, a consultation coming from, like a local group or like the town council or the parish council, as opposed to those wide consultations? Obviously on traffic regulation orders you can't do that, but like on certain other things you could think creatively about how we can do consultation, at least in collaboration with like more local level structures that perhaps could be a bit more trusted. Because I think it also comes to the idea of trust. People say like, well, why should I would have completed this, but I didn't know about this, or I don't trust my opinion will ever matter. And for me, at the end of the day as well, especially when things are quite small, like for example, when you propose as councillors those very small parking restrictions, whatever it might be, like super hyper local on one street, is how much this thing will cost. I mean, I had one time an application, maybe it cost like £1,000 to just paint some things, like some lines on the street, and then you can spend 5, 6, 7,000 pounds on consultation. At one point, I think like I can't, like in good faith, because it's public money, agree to reconsult and reconsult again, because I know I'm reconsulting for a job that takes £1,000 to do. I'm spending £10,000 on consultation because we don't get a response. So at one point, you do have to take a decision. Like you do have to say, well, what are you going to do about this? Regardless of, I mean, obviously you have to take into account to say, am I actually going with a longer term decision and maybe it's like 50 to 48% and I'm still doing it, or am I saying like, no, 50% said no and I'm going to just stop the scheme and still have wasted £1,000 on consultation in the first place. So it's really tricky from like a financial point of view. At one point do you stop spending money on consulting and reconsulting? That's a question for you all.
But that's why we have elected representatives, isn't it? To make tough decisions in difficult circumstances and absorb all the information, some of which is in the consultation or the citizen assembly or whatever. And that's kind of why we're elected. These decisions make themselves. And ultimately we have to make the choice and we have to be responsible for those choices on behalf of people, which is why they elect us. So I don't have a big problem for that. And I think, this is a particular problem for towns and cities on 20-mile-an-hour zones, because actually I represent a mainly rural patch with 8 or 9 villages, and made at parish council level, people are generally happy for their representatives to decide on the 20-mile-an-hour zone for their village or not. And so that happens quite easily for the villages I represent without controversy. It's only in St Neots and Huntingdon, I think, and probably in places like Ely as well, where you've got lots of people and lots of different views, that they tend to be a problem.
Well, and in Cambridge City, I have to say, but I think that's like an interesting thing as well. It's like, what do you compare it with? So just yesterday, I was speaking for a local highways application. I put in as a county councillor to basically make a school crossing safer in Abbey in Cambridge. So there's a school where there's an unsignaled crossing and a zone. So there's a 40-mile-an-hour road that goes 30, and the sign that goes 30 is exactly in front of that crossing near the school. So then it's like kind of like, and then we're sat here debating 20 mile an hour for whole areas. And I understand people's frustrations, but then we have examples like very in our county of places that really should be like lower speed and they're not. And you also think in terms of priorities, because I got this from a resident being like, why are you wasting money on making, let's say, Huntingdon or whatever 20 when you should address those immediate safety concerns in other parts of the county? And it's not a right or wrong answer for that, but it is true that especially if you travel a lot, you can see perhaps other issues that you think at least should be prioritized more than something that perhaps doesn't perhaps have the save so many lives in the long term. But then again, you go back to the argument on committee, which David and I attended, with some councillors, they're saying, well, even if it's predicted to save 1 life in the long term, that is worth it to do as a scheme. But I think there are areas that are generally more dangerous than others, like just in terms of looking at not only accident data but likelihood and so on. And I feel a bit quite conflicted when I think like, well, I have a road I'm making application for, which is 40 to 30 near a school. And then, I'm thinking about like a 20-mile-an-hour zone in an area where perhaps, some areas are obviously 100% needed. Like, even some of the areas the town council proposed, one of them, for example, like is near a school and on routes to school and so on. But then you kind of think, how do you prioritize? But then you come back to the argument. They're like, well, but it does cost less in the long term if you do like a bigger zone as opposed to those like small zones like everywhere. So it's really like no answer to please everyone on this, which I find interesting from a
I mean,
debate point of
the
view.
point of all of it is you're never going to be able to please everybody, and I think Stephen's point is the most valid one. That when it comes down to it, councillors are there to make decisions, and and it is to weigh this stuff up. And I mean, I take what you said about Alex, but the 20 mile an part of the big reason for 20 mile an hour zones in modern days, and I find this weird, and we're straying into the rights and wrongs. It's a lot of it is about there is obviously an issue about reducing speed and the likelihood of somebody being killed if there's an accident, but you've also got the air quality issues as well, and air quality costs lives as well, and that's my understanding about the whole 20 mile an hour debate is the air quality issue is a huge part of it. And one of the things I find strange is the places where we're getting the most vociferous objection to 20 mile an hour from councillors. A lot of those councillors are the same people that challenge the notion about development towards electric cars and stuff like that. And you think, well, on the one hand, they don't want cars that use cleaner energy. On the other hand, they don't want cleaner air. I just find it bizarre. But yeah,
this whole debate would be much easier if there was some clear statistical evidence that suggested that 20 mile an hour zone saved life. And David and I have talked about this before. And when David was talking about feeling slightly nervous about presenting this to the county council, I suspect that that's some of it. If there was clear evidence that said, like, we're going to put a 20 mile an hour zone there, and it might save a life or some lives, even though rationally that has to be true because impact energies are much lower. With lower velocities, in fact, they decrease with the square of velocity, or maybe even the cube of velocity. I have to think about that, but it has to be the case. But there's no strong evidence that supports that, and it makes it more difficult to make the argument. I think, and David and I have talked about this before, and we both feel, I think, that they're a good idea, but we can't prove they're a good idea just yet. Although I think there might be some more data that's available.
So the data is starting to come in, but it's not there. It's not there yet. I think part of it is just physics. So it takes more energy to get from 20 to 30 than it does from 0 to 20. So a car going at 30 just has a lot more energy. So that there's that. There's also a few issues that kept coming up where there's some people talking about the environmental and more emissions, and it's like, yes, if you're driving at 30, the car will be more efficient than at 20. You are not driving around Huntingdon consistently at 30 miles an hour. You're just not. There are traffic lights, a place where you have to speed up and slow down, and so there's that. But there isn't that evidence there at the moment.
But there is a strong argument, and there is evidence for it, that it's pinch points where the air quality issues are at the worst. So things like traffic jams, lights, and entrances to roundabouts. Those are the areas where where people are waiting there, where the air quality issues exist. And if you've got something like a 20 mile an hour zone, you've got a cleaner flow of traffic where people are waiting less at places like that, and that counts for something.
That absolutely makes sense. I mean, there's also the sort of specific geography of areas. You get some places, I think, where effectively pollution gets trapped a bit, just because of the buildings in the area, or the sort of local geography or whatever. So that I think that can make a difference as well. But yeah, I mean I don't know. There's also just a bit of conspiracism, or maybe conspiracism isn't the right word, but with the ULEZ thing in London, there was a lot of, oh my God, this is the most outrageous thing ever. Why are you trampling on our God-given rights as freeborn Englishmen? There was a little bit of that.
There's a good video that I shared on the Huntingdon Facebook group, which is when the UK first introduced drunk driving law, and there's loads of drunk people in pubs arguing against drunk driving laws because it's an infringement of their civil rights. And so any of these changes are controversial in the beginning, but actually when you get used to them. So I think part of it is most of us are not used to driving in 20-mile-an-hour zones, are we? You're used to driving in 30-mile-an-hour zones, and it feels like you're going really slow. But with exposure and experience, I think that will go away.
I mean, I think so much is to do with perception, actually, because I was having this conversation with someone, and it does feel like when driving through God Manchester, for example, now has a 20-mile-an-hour zone, you can really feel the difference coming from the ring road, and then you really slow down. I think I think the scheme works well there, but yeah, you have this perception. And I was actually discussing with someone saying, well, about Huntington, about the 20-mile-an-hour zone, being like, well, but I don't really need these specific street examples to drive. It's 30 now, it's perfectly fine. I know, I'm a decent enough driver. Yes, there are cars parked on both sides, but I can get through it. And why should I slow down traffic? And I'm thinking sometimes we don't consider as well, because I can see that perspective and that issue of perception. But for example, especially on those residential roads where you have cars parked on both sides, even if you're fine driving and you can you have a very good reaction time and everything else, you can have very easily can see how children or people can go from those for those cars up to the road, there's no crossing, and how then it's Stephen's point about the physics, how actually the speed does matter in terms of what will happen to that person if something appeared in front of you, despite of you being a good driver or whatever might be the case. And I think it's a difficult argument to make, because I also think similarly. I'm yeah, I think at 30, surely I'll be able to stop and so on. I'm quick enough to see that, but it's not always the case. And we have seen so many tragic cases across the country, really, when those accidents on residential areas happen, when, despite your belief in yourself and how you're able to stop the car, sometimes people don't react on time. And that's when that speed, if you're going 25 as opposed to 35 on a residential road, does actually matter in terms of the accident impact. That's the more difficult debate of how do we actually quantify that.
I mean, you can do that with colleagues, quality adjusted life years, but that people aren't going to I'm going to pick up some comments. A30 after 4 being 40 after 20 is a massive waste of everyone's time. From Genesis Meta, I agree, but I think that is now being remedied, or I think that's on the.
I have an update. I got so confused with this one, because I asked them a million times about this, and I think some of the local MPs also asked and so on. So, I mean, I think there are two parts of this. So, first of all, they are looking at. There are some works being done now until the end of August, I think, to look at the flooding risk. And then there's the issue of the barrier as well, which is not up to standard. So I think both of those things need to be sorted before it's the speed, the 40 is completely removed. So it says, so the update I got is that the work to resolve the carriage flooding is programmed with the proposed start date of July 2024. So basically this month. I'm not sure if they're doing something already, but basically that flooding work will be over the summer, completed by the end of August. So that's when you see already, or you see some lane closures. And then when the drainage work is completed, right, then you have to test it. And then then the 40-mile-an-hour temporary speed limit is removed and revert to national speed limit. So I still think it's a few months to go, to be honest, knowing how those works work.
But having seen that same update, the reason why that speed limit's in place is because there was a fatality on that road, which was attributed to flooding, and so they have to resolve the problem. The road used to be maintained by National Highways. It's been detrunked and is now run by the county council. There was a bit of a wrangle about who pays for the cost of the barriers and the flooding. But if people have been killed on that road, or somebody has been unfortunately killed on that road, then it's up to the authorities to sort that problem out and to make sure it doesn't happen again. And so I think I know it's inconvenient, but for the price of fixing the problem and saving somebody's life, I think that's genuinely worth it. And you could argue it's taken too long, which is probably true, but I think it involves some highways engineering aspects which are difficult to program sometimes. But that's the reason why it's in place, and it's not just for NIMBY silly reasons. It's because actually somebody died on that piece of road.
Yeah, and it took a long time as well, because when it was transferred to the county council, now the county council are obviously overseeing it and managing the works, but it did have that period of a few months when it was like still national highways, and the county council was in the process of detrunking it. So I think a lot of the delay was in that process, rather than like once they had it, planning the works. And now, of course, part of the work is starting this summer, or has started already anyway.
And its county council sensibly said no to national highways unless you pay for some of this. You know, the question of who pays for this: is it a government agency, or is it for you as a local council taxpayer? And so there's always going to be those wrangles between the government agency and the local authority on who gets to pay for road works that should have been done anyway. So I think that's part of the problem and part of the delays as well.
Oh, sorry. Go on.
It's worth saying, Stephen, with those arguments, and although it is relevant when you're on the ground as a councillor making these decisions about who pays for it, when it comes down to it, the people that are paying for it is the taxpayer, and we should remember that it's taxpayers' money, and the taxes are there for us to do things, not to not do things, and I with something like that especially, somebody needs to just get on and do it.
County council is Barasic Lint, though, isn't it? That's the problem. There's no money, and you have to squeeze
absolutely, I do get that.
Question going back from Daniela: doing the consultation felt like a waste of money and time. It feels like we let you think you have a say in this, but in reality, we will do what we want. I think, Daniela, I think you're right. I think that is the perception that people have. And I think that's an issue. I think that is a real issue. And I think how that, whether it's true or not, the perception exists, and that is a problem.
One of the things we sometimes do when it comes to on long consultations, we do a thing where you said we did, which is effectively just showing how consultation has impacted on what you do, on the outcomes, and I think it's quite important that because it does give people a sense that they have enabled change to happen. Sometimes for various reasons it can't, and you need to say that as well. Yes, a lot of people ask for this, we've looked at it, and the reason this can't happen is because at least people feel then that the consultation was listened to and people have tried to look at the issues, and some of that I think is important, but all of that process costs money, and therein lies the issue.
And then there's a question here from Andrew: how is it legitimate to GCP to issue a consultation, yet they're the same people who report on the results? Surely consultation need to be independently run to be valid. No, I don't think so. It's how you do it and what you do with the data. So, for instance, on the consultation that we're talking about for 20 mile an hour, all of the results were published. So I I think there's we didn't do it very well or whatever. But I don't think that people are putting their finger on the scale and putting in fake results or anything like that. So no.
Yeah, but there's always which questions you reply to and how you process the data, which is it's not a problem with just GCP. It's a problem with EWR, who do the same things. Around where I live, there's also been the Luton Airport stuff, where Luton Airport and NATS, who are the two organizations, commercial organizations who are interested in results, are the ones that process all the data, who write the reports, and not the decision-making authorities. That is a problem quite often, that the people are marking their own homework, and if you report on all the responses, that's fair enough, but there's also data kind of presentation that doesn't really help sometimes as well.
So
GCP.
I'm going to push back on that. For somebody that makes a living out of consultation, it'd be lovely for me to turn around and say, yes, everybody should use an independent consultant to do it. The issue then comes down to the fact that if I do it as an independent consultation, somebody's paying for it. And what you'll start to do is increase the cost of consultation. And I'm not sure for most of the consultations that the public sector do, you would get much more value out of it. That's my perception.
They are abused by politicians, though, aren't they? During election campaigns, we had during the last election campaign Anthony Brown doing his long sand surveys, which aren't robust at all, and him presenting the results for political gain. I guess that's a different example than a institution doing it when it's an individual politician. But I quite like to do surveys and report on the results, but I try not to do it with the same sort of political bias that was used during the general election. But maybe that's a different discussion.
I mean, that's a good point to remind people. If you receive a political survey from any party that says, please tell me where the worst potholes are, they won't be reported to the county council where they should be reported. You'll just get more emails from said party or get in their voter database. So do report it appropriately. Because I don't think anyone receiving tens of political surveys will actually go on the county council website and report their pothole location. I have seen this done, and I'm actually quite annoyed because I would like more things to be reported properly, and sometimes it helps when more people report a problem for the problem to be prioritized. But the way to do it is not through any type of political survey in general.
Well, absolutely, something that people should understand, that when you get something from the local Conservative Party, the local Labour Party, the local Lib Dems that ask you tokenistic questions, they're not interested in the responses to the questions. What they're interested in is you giving them your name, your email address, your address, and then ticking a box to say you want marketing from them. But that's what they want, is the data that goes with it. It's a data capture exercise.
So we're talking about 20 miles an hour. I think we've covered that and the discussion. Going with general, Huntingdon is getting 20 miles an hour in residential areas, and there'll be a review of that in 2 years' time. We were also.
Is it worth me saying it's the end of this, David? Just to make a point. When I was a councillor, which is a long time ago because I'm old, we did 20 mile an hour zones at a place called Drybread Road in Whittlesea, outside Alderman Jacobs School, and a bigger area. And there was a little bit of a fuss from some people when we did it. We hear nothing from people now. It's an accepted part of what that area is. And from my perspective, it's been a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of my concerns, and I don't know if I sort of overdo this, but one of my concerns is the sort of whole trust in politics thing, and that everything you do or everything we do while we're doing politics at the moment, in whatever form, we need to have that in mind. How does this affect trust in politics? How does this build trust in politics? And I think that maybe I sort of over-index on that a bit. But I think part of the concern I have is you want to take people along for the journey. Realistically, most people, I don't think particularly mind on this. I know it's not the end of the world. This one slightly iffy process isn't going to bring down democracy, but it's an opportunity to sort of explain how the process works or something along those lines that I think maybe was missed. Like I said, I don't know if I'm overdoing it or being hopelessly naive or something, but yeah, that's sort of where I am on it.
I just put this comment before we go on to the more controversial issues of the mayoral elections.
Yeah.
Because I actually read this saying, Joanna says, having moved to the US as a child, I can't understand why 20 mile an hour thing is such a problem here. All residential estates are 25 mile an hour there. I actually thought about this because I grew up in Romania, right, until I was 18, and that's 30 kilometers an hour, in town, which is basically 18.6 miles. And I actually never questioned this before I came to the UK, and it became such a controversial thing. And I think it's actually true that, if you lived in other countries or you come from other countries where this 25 mile an hour in residential or the 30 kilometer speed limit, which translates to basically fewer than 20 miles an hour, is the norm in residential built up areas, especially busy areas, then you come here and see a consultation and think why on earth is this controversial? But I can totally understand why, if you're not used to this and you always lived in an area which was not 20 or there was no 20 anywhere around you, then this is a big change because you can feel the difference. But I thought it's an interesting comparison. It's what you're used to before. And same as people coming from London, if you lived in one of those 20 miles an hour in London before and you got used to it and then you moved to Huntingdon, you might have a different perception than always living in an area that's 30. So that's an interesting one. back to the controversial stuff.
We have, as people know, the mayor of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, who at the moment is Dr. Nick Johnson. There will be an election. He's up for election next year, and we've got various sort of Conservative runners and riders. So I'm going to hand over to Martin, or actually, I'll hand over to anyone. I'm guessing Martin, but I don't know much about it. Who are the runners and riders?
So the ones I know of, and I might miss one here, so tell me, but I've got the ones that I understand. Paul Bristow is interested, Wayne Fitzgerald, Anna Bailey, Steve Count, and there's one other that I can't think of, which is...
Is it that lady? Oh, she's talking about, it was Cannon or something. She blocked me on Twitter, so I don't know her real name. She's talking about it too. I think she was an agent or some sort of comms officer.
Okay, yeah, but those are the ones I know of, and it's I just have a sort of concern about that list because they've all there are past issues with all of them to a certain extent in different ways. The one I have the most time for is Anna Bailey, because if you look at how she runs East Cambs, you know, she's not afraid to be innovative, to do things that are different. And I think that side of Anna, I think, makes her, to me, the front runner. But if you look at how Wayne and Wayne's role as leader of Peterborough, as a good example, and you know, I've worked with Wayne a little bit in the past, and I quite like him as an individual, but he was mired in controversy, and similarly with Paul Bristow's way of approaching his time as a member of Parliament. He could be quite divisive in the way he dealt with other parties and stuff. And I'm not. My concern is we're slowly moving beyond this with the combined authority, and these candidates are potentially taking us backwards, and we need to hear from those guys about why they are going to be different as a mayor. Because I think it's really important for Cambridgeshire that we don't take a step backwards or 2 steps backwards.
They've all got blood on their hands, haven't they, with the current problems at the combined authority, some more directly than others, but they've all been involved in this kind of sticking the boot into Nick Johnson, which might or might not be deserved. I think it's been deserved entirely, and that's a bit of a problem. I know most of the, well, at least in Cambridgeshire, outside of Peterborough, I know most of the main players, yeah, and there's lots of decent Conservative people who make great mayors. What we want is somebody like Andy Street, don't we, or Andy Burnham, like a leader who's going to bring people together rather than these divisive characters. So it's a difficult choice. It's not my choice anyway, because I doubt I'll be voting for any of that lot. But it's a difficult selection of people.
I'm not a party member either anymore, so I won't get a say either, and probably that's part of the issue. I got told off by a few people when I resigned my party membership. Because it means that I don't have a say in who the next leader is, but I wasn't willing to throw any more money at the Conservative Party, and so if they'd have given me my membership for free, yeah, I'd have taken it, but I wasn't paying for it, and there are a lot of people that are of a similar ilk to me, and that's part of the issue. It's part of the issue with it's part of the issue with the Conservative Party nationally as well. A lot of the One Nationists have actually left the party because they just couldn't stomach it anymore. There were a few that stayed in so that they continue to have a say, but I just couldn't. And so I won't get a vote on this either. But I do think it's interesting that the candidates that come forward have got those issues about unity and how they work with others. Similarly with Steve Count, I remember walking into Shire Hall. And it was Shire Hall actually about 2 years after Steve took over as leader, and bumping into I think in different places about 3 separate councillors that I'd worked with when I was leader, and all of them pleading with me to come back because they just couldn't deal with how divisive the council had become. Yeah, and that
it really is. The last county council meeting, I don't know if we talked about it here, when I got told off for making this gesture at Steve Campbell, and the whole thing blew up and was really toxic. And now, some of that's probably on me, for being childish and making gestures, but it wasn't offensive. And like, it's just a big problem at county council. It doesn't exist. If you looked at the same cohort of councillors at district council, at Huntingdonshire District Council, which is at lower level, that's a very respectful, collegiate environment where we get lots of scrutiny, but people are kind to each other. And that's the problem. Of the people you've listed, I think that Anna Bailey is the most credible politicians, isn't she? Because most of the others, I mean, she's won elections. Most of the others have recently lost elections. I think Paul Bristow must have run a brilliant campaign to only lose by such a small margin, so he must be a very popular character. But none of them portray themselves very well.
I mean, I've a lot of time for Paul as a personal level. I've known him for a long time, and his dad was a town councillor of Whittlesea for a long time, and his dad was lovely. It's looking at how, and that issue, because all of those people have got those issues to deal with, and same with the thing about Anna is it's not just that she's won elections, and she's won elections where she's been predicted to lose them as well, that does count for something. It's also with Anna that she's done things, and she's achieved things as a leader that set East Cambridgeshire apart, that mean that she's got her own personality as leader into it, and I think that counts for a lot. But the issues around how she's conducted herself sometimes at the combined authority are, and I know because I've spoken to her in the last few weeks, she does have very strong feelings, and I accept that, and I can sort of see the reasons for it. But people have to have confidence that as we move forward with this combined authority, especially as it becomes more important under a Labour government, that who we're electing from either Conservative, Lib Dem, Independent, or Labour, we've got to have somebody that it continues to move the combined authority forward, because I do get a sense now that it is moving forwards. It's not just looking backwards and infighting. And we just cannot afford as a county to go backwards.
And the political landscape's changed, hasn't it, since James Palmer was mayor, when the whole county, with the exception of City and I think South Cambs, was Conservative. Now the county council has changed. The day before Nick was elected, because I was there. Lots of district councils have changed. Lots of the MPs have changed. We've got 3 Lib Dems, 1 Labour, 2 Conservatives. That's right, across the whole of the country. Yeah. No, maybe three Labour now, and so that whole picture has changed completely. And it's a more collaborative. It should be a more collaborative, collegiate kind of.
It's irrespective of how the political landscape has changed. It's how politics needs to move as well, and it does need to move in that direction. And my fear would be that you would, if the Conservatives did win, you'd have a Conservative mayoralty, and they'll be using the mayoralty to throw rocks at the Labour government, and in a way that Andy Street and others didn't, and other mayors didn't. Andy Burnham to a certain extent did, but I think mostly on issues where he thought it was valid. We need to have somebody that can work with the government, work with a national agenda to get the best for Cambridgeshire. And that's what those candidates have got to be able to demonstrate. How are you going to be able to do that? And I hope that's primary in the way the Conservatives select whoever they select.
Yeah, I think it's also very easy for all those issues to be made as party political issues, when I actually do think on some of the combined authority areas, if you look at like obviously the transport and integrating transport and the new powers combined authorities will have and how they'll be more important now working with this new government. Actually, you do kind of need cross-party working on this, because you do need to get people on board to be able to do like a proper transport system for our region. Same with like all the work around like skills that should be in the interest of everyone, regardless of whether you're like Tory or Labour or Lib Dem. You should want like a better funding deal for our area on adult education, for example. So yeah, I think a lot of those topics, it actually doesn't help when you make them hyper political, and when you try to find opposition out of like every like small thing and detail, because at the end of the day then you get to a point where it's even worse from the public perception when you're like, oh, I've been here for 5 years and I haven't done anything because I can't get anything through because I'm just arguing with each other like on whatever committee or board it is, and nothing really progresses. And I think there's a fair criticism saying like, well, what tangible things have changed on transport, for example, and what could actually realistically change that could be facilitated by this government.
Well, I agree with that, and I also think if we look locally, you know, one of the things that has changed with public transport is, you know, we're really starting to make progress in terms of developing a vision as an example for buses, and I think it's a vision that will expand. And there is an argument, you know, to say that you know that's Nick's work, you know, and you know, Nick would argue that he deserves a chance to continue it. And I know
he
that
is arguing. He just texted.
I know
me.
he is. I know that's exactly what I was just going to say. He's just sent me a message as well.
He says,
and I think
we'll have to get Nick on to talk for himself. But Nick said he's done the hard work in bringing things together, and he deserves a second term. And he has done the hard work, isn't it? Because you know, it's been a massive battle across a very regularly changing political landscape. Things have got better. He's had a lot more support, and he thinks he deserves a second term. We should have him on here, I think, and ask him and get him to justify a second term as well. I'm a bit biased because he's one of my mates, and I'd always vote for him. But I wouldn't always vote for him, but in general, I would.
I think and I've said this to Nick as well. I think he got off to a difficult start, and I think most people would accept that. But actually, what we are starting to see is we're starting to see progress. And it's not to say that James didn't do some things, because he did, and you know, during his time as well. Yeah. But James was also part of the reason for what Nick inherited, and you know, we have to sort of look at that, and we look at, yes, it is progress, but how is the electoral system next year going to work with Nick or with whoever? Who the candidates are. You know, if we're going to just have a straight first past the post system, I
think I
hope not. Because
Nick, I don't think I talked to Nick about this, and Nick thinks it's not going to change. So he's probably got more information than we have. So
yeah, probably.
I hope not as well.
It's a shame because it's secondary legislation. The trouble is with the first past the post system and the mayoralty. If we want the mayoralty to work on the basis that it's a collaborative role, you know, that basically consolidates and brings forward ideas for Cambridgeshire to government to get funding. Then if that's the case, then the second preference and that stuff actually saying the majority of people being able to say, I did actually in some way or another make a preference that said I preferred Nick, I think is important, and that's why I think it makes a difference in the mayoralty. And it's secondary legislation, so it's the Home Secretary, isn't it, I think, can do it and change it at the stroke of a pen. So it's not a difficult thing to do, and maybe the mayors need to look at it and make a case to the Home Secretary to say you need to switch this back.
Well, almost the first act of the new government was to drag them all into Downing Street, wasn't it? All of them.
Yeah.
So and we can see that the new government is investing in the mayorships, mayoralties, whatever they're called. Go on.
And there's a few more coming forward next year as well.
Yeah, I think there'll be new ones, but also it's about the powers as well. And I think it's quite interesting, like the news that came out this week about the business case for franchising being approved by the combined authority, and it's going ahead. But of course, there are other areas in the country where this process hasn't started, and actually giving combined authorities the powers to franchise and so on. That's quite, I mean, it could be like a more coordinated, I guess, national effort on this. Whereas before it was more like, well, this specific mayor over here is doing this, and the timeline doesn't really match with this other mayor who's doing this other thing. And on those processes, I take a long time. People were commenting yesterday, being like, well, it's like at least like 3-4 years until we get to see any of the results, because the processes take a lot of time and are quite complicated to get to the moment to even have a business case for franchising, to present it and to vote on it. It takes like years of discussions and work.
It's worth saying that it's not just franchising that's on the table. It's franchising, or there's a possible of this sort of enhanced agreement with one of the bus providers. And I just sort of throw my 2 pence in on this. I hope that what we move forward with is bus franchising and not some sort of enhanced agreement. I think a lot of people have got very frustrated with dealing with bus operators in the past. Yep. And you know, for as an example, if we want to break up the local monopolies that exist within bus services with the big operators, the only way we're going to do it is through franchising.
I absolutely agree. I mean, and it's interesting that as soon as this, you know, as soon as discussions about franchising started, all of a sudden the bus operators were like, "Oh no, we can do these things," that they weren't doing before. You know, we've got the bus forum and so on, you know, which is good to have, but I would rather we had the franchising system so that, you know, you as much as anything else, so that you're not locked in with one provider. No, you know, the folks from Stagecoach we've spoken to are great, but there's just a problem if you are locked in to one provider who would effectively be Stagecoach.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, you know, if you look at, there is a Monopolies Commission or whatever it's called, a Competition Commission report from quite a few years ago into the bus operators that said that they basically run local monopolies.
Yeah.
And nothing has been done about it. And franchising is an opportunity to do something about it.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Anything else we want to cover this morning?
I think it's close to the time when people need to go to work.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think so. So
I'm already at my place of work. You're all right.
Well, thank you all. We'll be back next week talking about coffee, buses, and politics. As ever, if anyone has got particular things that they would like us to cover, do say. I think we, you know, get in touch with any of us, and we'll probably come back and talk more about the sort of work on buses in a bit more detail. But other than that, I hope you all have a super weekend. If you are in Huntingdon, don't forget it's Sunset Beats and Bites this evening, 4 o'clock till 9 o'clock on the Market Square. Live music, food trucks, mobile bar. Come and say hello.
I'll be there with David, so come and say hello.
Yeah.
And there'll be actually like a very good collection, a very good choice of food trucks. I've seen the.
No, they're good. They're good. That is good.
Okay. I might have a trip out there. We'll see.
Cool. Yeah. Brilliant.
Is it good music? Is it some real heavy stuff? Is it?
No, it's not. Charlie and Rihanna, who are lovely, who are great, but it's not Corpiclani, if that's your question.
Or Burning Witches.
Burning Witches. Yeah. Yes. Next week, Martin will be singing Corpiclani's famous song "Vodka."
That is actually a Corpiclani song, by the way. That's.
I know. I do listen to Corpiclani. So.
Yeah, 90% of their stuff is about alcohol. It's great.
Yeah. Okay, take care, everybody. See you soon.
I'll see you soon.
Bye.